What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to RizzoCast, episode number 16. And we are joined by one of my favorite follows on Twitter. You guys can find him at Andersen Pickard because it is Andersen Pickard. He is a baseball, football, um, junkie. And this kid, like literally editor-in-chief, Talk Prime Time, or Primetime Sports Talk. It's at Talk Prime Time. He's the editor-in-chief there. He's also a writer for MLB Daily Dish, and he's a manager at Sports Writers Pack, which I follow. It helps. He's also a member of the Internet Baseball Writers of America, or Association of America, and he's also a youth sports referee. Which, you know what, we're gonna get into that in a little bit, but because I'm so interested in that. But Andersen, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for asking. Thanks for having me on. Really excited to talk. Whatever we're going to talk about today. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, so that should be good.
Yeah, for sure. So, the pandemic has changed so many things, and the way we look at different things, the way we look at hygiene, even the way we cherish sports. So, without sports, I mean, I was going nuts. I'm sure you were too. How has your life changed due to this pandemic?
I mean, it's been crazy. I was thinking back about how it's changed by the day and by the week and by the month. Because back in March, the days, 3 or 4 days before Rudy Gobert tested positive coronavirus, my high school was on March break, and we had a baseball trip scheduled to head down to Orlando, or the Orlando area. There's a bunch of high schools that go down there. Some college teams too. They have their own tournament, but there were a lot of New England high schools that were set to go down there, and we were going to play against them. We had a week down there. We were going to attend a couple spring training games. We were going to play a bunch of games under the lights in that Florida heat and stuff like that. So it was going to be a great week of baseball. And then it all came crashing down when Rudy Gobert tested positive, and then just everything happened there. I think that same day, March Madness was canceled. I think the Ivy League canceled all their spring sports, and then I believe they also announced fall sports that day, but I don't know for sure. That might have been later on. But that was when this was all declared an official pandemic. So that day, just thinking back of different benchmarks and days. So that day was huge because that left so much uncertainty, and then unfortunately all that uncertainty was clarified in a negative way with my trip was canceled. NFL free agency was all basically shut down. It was remote. Like, signings still happened, but nothing was official right away because no one could be in person. Major League Baseball suspended spring training, and then soon decided that they would have at least 2 weeks before the regular season would start. And at that point, I was crushed. I was like, really, no baseball for another month? But little did we know it was going to be more than that. So fast forward now to July, baseball is finally back, hopefully here to stay. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit here, but it's just been crazy, from personal life, just like you said, having sports as entertainment, really all over the place. It's just been truly crazy and unprecedented.
Yeah, for sure. And like you, I had a trip planned too. Our journalism team at my high school was going to travel to Nashville for the High School National Journalism Convention. It was literally the last thing to get canceled, and canceling all the flight stuff. It's just something that I don't wish upon anybody. And baseball, we were ready to play a game, and before first pitch, they canceled. Um, Anyhow, so everybody I've talked to has come up with something that they've kind of done more during quarantine. I mentioned a lot that I've read more. I've taken on a sports writing class done by Carrie Crowley, who is possibly going to be a guest coming up here soon, who is the Giants beat writer for the Bay Area News Group. And I've been going on walks, been going on runs, been doing my resistance bands. So what have you picked up that maybe like is something new, like a hobby or something that you've done more since this quarantine shelter in place stuff has happened?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wish I could say I started reading more like you, but I've still slacked off in that department. I know first week I was like, oh, this is going to be great. Like, I now have 16 hours a day that I'm just going to be at home. That's plenty of enough time to read. But Sports Illustrated magazines is about the furthest I've gotten there. But anyways, just going for runs, like you said, it's playing baseball as much as I can. I have a younger brother, and my dad coaches my younger brother's team, so I've been able to play with them. My brother's team was their season was pushed back, but it just started up, so I'm helping coach his all-star team, so that's great. Just trying to do as much as I can to stay outside because I had noticed, there was a week or two there where I was really just inside just because I couldn't find a lot to do. And I just noticed I was feeling really just gloomy and really down. So I was able to, pick up that baseball, that experience as a coach for his team. So that was really fun. I added youth umpiring to my list this year. I had done flag football and basketball refereeing before, but umpiring is really cool. So I've been doing that. Trying to gain some fantasy football knowledge. This is the first year I'll be doing fantasy football writing. So I've spent a lot of time doing my rankings and stuff like that. Trying to connect with family. I have family who live nearby, so I'm glad about that. But even then, it's been restricted just how much we can see them because we want to play it safe. Some of them are older. Some of them have jobs that they've been having to go in 2 or 3 days a week to a hospital or something like that. So just trying to keep in touch with everyone and I guess be as normal as like have my life be as normal as my life can be, in variations, like still trying to play baseball or see family or write and stuff like that. It's obviously so weird, but just adjusting and trying to figure out how to, have that type of normalcy in a time that is completely not normal.
For sure. And then you hear that baseball's coming back. You hear all the rumors and all the negotiation, the really, really hard to take in negotiations, the Players Association not backing down, Major League Baseball not backing down. And ultimately, there was a season that Rob Manfred pushed and it was 60 games. And here we are now, a week into the 60-game season. When you found out that baseball was going to come back, maybe not in the conventional way, because we thought there would be like an official agreement between the Players Association and baseball. So when you found out that baseball was coming back and they unveiled the schedule and all the travel plans that they have, how excited were you?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It felt like we had been not misled, but hyped up and then heartbroken when things would fall through and stuff like that. I know back in early June, I think it was, there was a report from I'm pretty sure it was ESPN that said they were close to agreement on a safety protocol. I'm like, oh great, baseball is back. But obviously there was more than that. So baseball is finally back, and I was excited about that when that final announcement was made that they'd be implementing the shortened season. I think, I keep saying it didn't really hit me at once. I think it didn't fully hit me until I saw baseball back on my TV on July 23rd. But just having, I was able to write that story. I was the person who wrote that story about baseball coming back on MLB Daily Dish. So I covered that and just seeing the details. I think being informed and knowing the logistics of what was happening really gave me that feeling of, okay, baseball is finally coming back. I think I recorded a podcast 2 days after the announcement was made. So that kind of hyped me up too, once I was able to read the logistics out loud to an actual audience, hear my voice say those words. And there were a few times in that podcast where I just stopped and just basically said, baseball is back. This is incredible. And I think, those were the times when I was really focusing on it and almost reporting on it and like sharing the news, that it really, really hit me. Like, yeah, baseball's coming back. We finally got this. We made it through that crazy 3 or 4 month span. And, it's going to be crazy for another, who knows how long, but at least we have baseball by our side to help us out.
For sure. And with baseball, there comes a little bit new, some foreign aspects to the game here in 2020. Maybe things that we'll see in the next CBA, things we'll definitely see in the next CBA. First of all, I want to get your take. So this one was announced long before COVID, and Rob Manfred and company have been obsessed with the thought of trying to make games go faster. And I've said this for a while. The really casual baseball fans who maybe not are caught up with the everyday grind that a super fan would be interested in. Maybe that fan is kind of like, oh wow, these games are too slow. It's the 9th inning. It's already, past my bedtime, whatever. but I really never saw it as much as a problem. And they implement this three batter minimum rule, and managers that really utilize the matchup. And I'm biased here, but Bruce Bochy was the best manager I've ever seen with a bullpen, especially in postseason play. And the three batter minimum rule really, for me, screws it up, and it screws up the strategy in the game. And I just don't think it's necessary. I think a lot of managers, Gabe Kapler last night, or the time of the recording, Gabe Kapler last night forgot about the rule and didn't know how to, and maybe that is his fault, but it probably is, but um, he didn't know how to manage around the three batter minimum rule. So I was wondering what your thoughts about that rule is.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just to address the pace of play aspect of it at first is personally, I don't like it. I'm fine with watching a 4-hour baseball game because, like you
Exactly.
said, it's the super fan in us that loves it. But at the same time, I also hate scrolling through Twitter or Instagram or something like that and seeing fans saying baseball is too long, baseball is boring, baseball is easy, stuff like that. I hate those types of, like you said, casual fans or not even fans of the game that say baseball is boring. So if speeding the game up a little bit is going to help those fans, realize what baseball actually is and how amazing the sport is, then I'm okay with it. But personally, I didn't need it. Like, I'm fine with a 4-hour baseball game. That Dodgers Astros game a couple days ago, that went into, I think it was 13 innings, might have been 12. That was fun. The runner on second base was weird, but anyways, back to the 3 pitcher minimum. It's going to be a whole new strategy, and I think teams are obviously adapting to that. I like the idea of bringing in that guy who can face one batter, record one out, and that's his job. You're paying him $3 or $4 million to get one batter out every 2 days. So I think that was a cool strategy. We might still see that with 2 outs because pitchers have to finish the inning. They can face one batter as long as they finish the inning. So we might see that from time to time. It disappoints me that that's no longer in the game, but at the same time, let them pitch, let that guy escape the jam, get in with bases loaded and no outs, and then make him escape that jam, without allowing a run and recording 3 outs. So I see the pros and cons to it. Ultimately, if it was only done to improve the pace of play, like if Manfred was weighing it and he's like, well, it improves the pace of play, but it's really not good for baseball, then I don't like it. But if he truly believes it's better for baseball, not only in terms of pace of play, but also with how the game is played, then I guess I can adapt to it. And I know baseball teams are adapting to it and changing their strategies too. So, it is what it is. But it's something we're all gonna have to get used to. But I think I'll be okay with it in the long run.
For sure. Yeah. And you mentioned how weird the runner at second base was. And, I saw it last night with the Giants and the Padres. And, um, I see both sides of the argument. I thought it was a joke when I first saw it being proposed. I thought to myself, this is something that they do after, if a tournament baseball game goes too long and there's another team sitting in the stands waiting for the game, this is what they do to try to get those guys on the field. And I experienced it last year, summer baseball, of course, and I thought it was great. I thought it was really fun. There was pressure on both sides to perform, especially the home team. The home team, and this could be a con to it too. I know FP Santangelo Jr. Tweeted this out earlier, and him and I have had these talks about it. But he doesn't like it. He thinks that it's the home team is at a complete disadvantage. They're starting the inning off with a runner at second base. And then what if the away team scores? There's way more pressure on the home team to produce. I still like it. I still think that, fundamentally it's going to show what teams are good at that, moving the runners over, doing the little things right, getting a ball in the air. I think it's really going to help teams play fundamentally sound, but I could understand the rage around it.
Yeah, I mean, I personally I don't like it. I think it gets rid of the luck almost by putting a runner on second base. You're looking at 100% skill and who's going to be able to get that runner home. Whereas I think definitely skill should be obviously the main thing that baseball is centered around. But funny bounces or even a bad call, those are the things that make up Major League Baseball, and those are what make me love the game so much. Those little aspects of not everything's going to be perfect every single time. It's not going to go exactly how it should go. That's what keeps fans watching, in my opinion. So I I see what impact it's going to have, and I think if they're going to test it out, this year is the year to do it. But I hope it doesn't return. I know they implemented it in the minor leagues back in 2018, and I saw a couple of games that went to extra innings that had it um, in the minors, and it seemed like there was some good energy around the stadium because you have a runner in scoring position every at bat. But at the same time, the baseball traditionalist, I guess, in me, even though I'm not, some old guy who's been watching baseball for 60 years. I wasn't a huge fan of it.
Fair, yeah, and I could, I wouldn't have a problem if it didn't return. But I like seeing new stuff being brought into the game. So another thing that comes with baseball in 2020 is a risk and the possibility that it could be taken away again at any point in time. And we've seen now an outbreak with the Marlins, and it's affected their opponent at the time, the Phillies, which is now affecting the maybe not a chain reaction, but now the Cardinals have some cases and there's games being canceled. The Brewers are now affected. And I think I saw something where like all these games are getting canceled. So what would it take? And I'm sure a lot of listeners or viewers, what would it take for baseball to be canceled again in 2020 with all these outbreaks? Would it be 5-6 teams having this? Would it be maybe another 2 teams having this? Is it falling apart already? What's going on?
Well, it's an interesting, discussion because in one aspect of it, they're playing like in basketball, it was you play a team for one day and then you move on to the next team and then you move on to the next team. Whereas in baseball, you have 3-game series. So you're playing the same team for 3 days. Whereas there, obviously the risk it's still high because you're playing them 3 days in a row, but at least you're not traveling and at least you're not, going to face a new team every day. At least you have a homestand of 3 games, maybe 6 games, maybe 9 games. So there's a little bit of a reduced risk there, which means they can live off those postponements and still have other teams play. Whereas we saw with basketball the first time around, they shut it down immediately once one player got it. But at the same time, you can't play baseball until late November or December. I know that had been discussed really earlier in the year when they were still discussing ideas for baseball to come back, but you can't play baseball in that late fall, early winter. Especially not in places, like where I am in New England, stuff like that. So if, you can't push those games back enough, and at the same time, there's, you can't have double headers every day, in my opinion. I think it won't happen yet, but I think if these like, for example, if you have 6 teams have outbreaks like these every 2 weeks, maybe it's okay for now, but if you get into, mid-September, and that's happening, you just have to shut it down, because I think the later we get, if outbreaks like these keep happening throughout the season, then baseball shouldn't be played. It can be played. Teams can find a way to work around that, call up players in the minors, sign free agents and stuff like that. But obviously, there's just too much of a risk.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's great to remember. Well, not great to remember, but it's important to remember that baseball and sports, for that matter, doesn't really matter. That was a lot of matters in that sentence. Sports and baseball take a back seat to what is going on in this country in terms of health. So I think that's important to note. So, Commissioner Andersen Pickard, if you were the commissioner of baseball, and Rob Manfred, for whatever reason, took a back seat, and you're his boss now, or he's somewhere else. What protocols would you put in place for these teams to follow? I know it's really hard to social distance in the dugout. Nobody does it because it's impossible. So what would you put in place to kind of make sure everything's in check?
Well, it's tough because I don't know they're like you said, they've put these rules in place, but they aren't being followed. And if you have an umpire trying to keep track of all that, the umpire's not going to eject someone for a high five, even if he's told he should. I saw a picture when Nick Senzel and Mike Moustakas were high-fiving eich other, and then the next day they both, weren't in the lineup. Moustakas was placed on the 10-day injured list. So it is stuff like that, like high fives or just walking by each other, that could end the season. And at this point, I don't think you can really say, all right, we have to ban this. You cannot walk by each other. You cannot high five each other. I think at this time, it should still be allowed that players can do that, because there's no real way to enforce that unless you want them spread out throughout the seats, no high fives, stuff like that. And in terms of, just limiting that spread and travel, I think it would have been cool to play a bubble in a hub city. I know the NHL and NBA have seen incredible test result numbers, and Major League Baseball has too, with the exception of, what's happened in the last few days. The league did say that other than that Marlins outbreak, they hadn't had any positive tests for 4 or 5 days, which was, a good number compared to past results. But, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few weeks now that these outbreaks are happening. And, again, will that trigger more random spot positive tests throughout the league, or will it really remain in those enclosed groups of 3 or 4 teams? So I think there's no real way to change the rules unless you know more about that. So if I were the commissioner, I would wait a few more days if I were to change something. As of right now, I think Manfred's doing a pretty good job. I think basically the only options right now are keep the season playing or shut it down. I don't think there's any in between. I don't think there's any way to enforce, other rules that would limit the spread more. I think overall the rules are pretty good. There's adjustments, but like I said, you can't really enforce those. So I think they're doing the best they can right now, the league, to, keep baseball playing with as many restrictions as they can possible.
For sure. And there's a new playoff format as well. There's going to be more teams, and that was like a couple hours up until first pitch they decided on this, or they had to decide on this by first pitch. So there's going to be more playoff teams. So do you like that idea of more teams getting in? I mean, I think it's just for this year, if I'm not mistaken. And we might see sub 500 teams get in, which some people say it's a bit of an off kill, and others say, well, if they could get through the powerhouse teams. So say if like a team like the Mariners, a really bad team, right? They get into the playoffs somehow, some way. It would be interesting to see how they would have to get through the Yankees, how they would have to get through the Astros, the Twins, all these great teams in the American League. So if a team were to win a championship here in 2020, would it be a legitimate title, or would you have to wait and see how they did it?
I've been saying this all along. I think it would be legitimate. You're still getting teams. You're getting past teams like that, like the Yankees. I think they said the ALDS would be short, or the AL and NLDS would be shortened to 3 games. So that puts a little more luck into it. But I would still consider it all legitimate. If, like I said, if you're getting past the Yankees, the Astros, the Nationals, Cubs, Phillies, teams like that, Dodgers, obviously, then yeah, it should be considered legitimate, even if it is on a smaller sample size of 1 game, 3 games, 5 games.
So there's something that happened a couple days ago at this time, at the time of this recording, that had to do with the Astros cheating scandal, and we haven't heard about it for months. We've been kind of overwhelmed by COVID-19, and I think the Astros really were saved by COVID-19, and in a weird way, because if this was a normal season, it'd be more fresh in the minds of other teams, and the Dodgers were the team that were one of the main teams that we look at and say they were directly affected by this. Whether or not the Dodgers would have won the World Series in 2017, we don't know. We'll never know. But Joe Kelly decides to go up and in on Alex Bregman. When I mean up and in, I mean head level. And Joe Kelly is not Greg Maddux. Never has been. Really, he's a guy that, if you look deep into the metrics, throws his curveball a lot. And if you I've talked to a couple Dodger people, a couple Dodger media people about Joe Kelly, and sometimes he doesn't even throw his fastball in some outings. He's more of a curveball guy, and it was interesting to me, and I think sending a message, and he threw up and into a couple guys, Correa, Gurriel, and if he wants to send a message, that's great. I'm all for sending a message, but once it goes up and in, once it goes, head area, that's not just ruining a guy's baseball career, possibly. That's ruining a guy's life. So that I would not do. Walking off the mound with your tongue out, as much as it created gold content for John Boy, it looked like a clown walking off the field, and Major League Baseball suspended him 8 games, which is such a cheap shot. 8 games for, somebody did the math. It's like 21, 22, 23 games in a regular season. 8 games is too much, but I also don't like what Joe Kelly did. What do you think about that entire situation?
Well, I definitely wouldn't have gone more than 8. I think 8 was probably the highest they could have gone there. And I have a couple thoughts on it. I'll try and say them now. I don't know if I'll be able to remember all of them. But first of all, like you said, this could have taken away those players, those hitters' careers, or even their lives, or not necessarily killed them. I mean, it could have, but impacted how they live the rest of their lives with brain damage or a head injury or neck injury, something like that. So it could have gone, really bad, really fast. I was the pitch to Bregman. Was that a fastball? Because I know the Correa one was not a fastball.
I think it was a fastball up and in, and the Correa one was like a weird, like, slider or whatever that he was trying to. It looked. I mean, you could make an argument that he was trying to clip the inside corner with the slider or something, or a curveball, but I think the one to Correa was an off-speed pitch.
Yeah, I know the Correa one was off speed. The Bregman one was what I was wondering. So if the Bregman one was fast, that one I'm not as concerned about because there are times where you have to throw, not have to throw, but where you throw at a batter to brush him back like that. The one that I took more seriously was the Correa one. Just how he handled that whole situation. The taunting was interesting. It was, like you said, it was hilarious, but at the same time, that certainly, I would imagine that added a game or two onto that suspension. But, I think he deserved it. I haven't quite decided yet. At first I was saying, yeah, he deserves the 8 games. I don't care if that'd normally be 22 in a regular season. He threw at someone's head. He threw at someone else. He taunted someone. He's had a history of being, just a excited player like that. The background on my phone screen is of him, punching, in that fight with the Yankees. So he's got a history of doing stuff like that. But
Tyler Austin, huh?
Yeah, he was, that this judge looking on in the background was looking at it now. It's just lands that punch right on him. But anyways, he has that history of being that type of player, and that certainly impacted the league's decision. Also, something else I wanted to mention was that Chris Young is the new Major League Baseball Senior Vice President of Baseball Operations. So it's no longer Joe Torre deciding these suspensions and punishments. So with, this was Chris Young's first disciplinary move and first decision on a matter like this. So if he can be consistent, if a situation like this happens again and he issues a similar suspension, I'll be good with it. We don't know a lot about how he handles these situations because we've seen a lot from Joe Torre and guys like that in the past. So if he's consistent, then great. I'm on board with this. But if someone else if another pitcher throws at someone else's head later on and gets a 2-game suspension or has a 4-game suspension appealed and they get it down to 2, that will make me, a little more frustrated about this decision because all in all, consistency, if you want to send a message, which is what they're trying to do with this 8-game suspension, you have to be able to send that message, but also be consistent. So that's partly why I haven't quite made a decision yet on if I fully agree with it or not. And I'm also curious. I know Kelly appealed, and I don't believe there's been a ruling on that yet. So if that gets brought down, to 6 or 4, then that'll be another thing I'll weigh. As of right now, just for a straightforward answer, I'm good with the 8-game suspension, but that could change later on.
That's interesting you bring up Chris Young because Chris Young back in the day, and this has nothing to do with the situation at all, but Chris Young actually got in a fight when he was with the Padres. He got in a fight with Derek Lee of the Cubs, and he threw a punch at Derek Lee, and it's a great picture and everything. Anyways, Chris Young is a guy that did not throw hard. And speaking of guys that, maybe are not throwing hard, we are seeing I don't know if it's an epidemic. It's not an epidemic. That's not the right word to use, but it's kind of interesting. We're seeing starting pitchers have their velocity go down completely. Just to read it off here, Madison Bumgarner was averaging 91.7 miles an hour last year. And then this year so far, he's at 87.9. Charlie Morton was at 95.1 last year. This year, he's at 92.4. Last year, Aaron Nola was at 93.5. This year, he's at 92. Actually, that one's not that big of a difference, 1 mile an hour off. So if this does become something that is regular and, more guys start to show it and it becomes noticeable, would this be a result of maybe, coming back to spring training 2.0 and firing everybody, not firing everybody, firing up the arms right away? Because, these guys came back and it was, back to bullpens, back to live hitters, and it was just rapid fire. And so is that maybe the reason why, because we've seen, Corey Kluber get hurt, Justin Verlander come down with the forearm elbow thing. Is this, maybe something that has to do with rushing back in terms of getting back in the grind of throwing?
Yeah, I would think so. And I was just going to mention before you said it, the injuries, because if there was the velocity loss but nobody getting injured, I would have said no, it's probably not them rushing back. But if with those injuries happening, you have to think it's got to be related, because, like you said, the velocity drop, just rushing back into camp that quickly. I know that was a main concern, was hitters can probably adapt and get back in after a day or two of training, because they've been working on this. They have history, obviously, of hitting. It's just a different type of style. You don't have to train for a week or two to get back into that. But pitching is so different, that it has to be. I would think it has to be related to that. Spring training, pitchers report early, so they get almost a month and a half of training before they get before first pitch on opening day. Whereas this was 2 weeks this time around before this opening day 2.0, a little more than 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but still, I would say it's definitely related, and hopefully it comes back down. Like, not necessarily the velocities go up, but hopefully the number of pitchers getting injured decreases. I hope, obviously you hope nobody gets hurt. So if, like, at this point, players have that extra training, because I would consider playing in games, I would consider that training for them. So at this point, hopefully we've gotten all the injuries out of the way and everyone is back to almost normal shape at this point. You hate to think of injuries as a good thing at any time, but seeing the injuries that have happened, start to decrease, that would be a good sign.
Yeah, for sure. And we obviously don't know what Walker Buehler, for example, was doing during this big layoff. We don't know how often he was throwing, and maybe teams knew, but yeah, obviously there's some correlation there. So in terms of the trading deadline, we're recording this on July 31st, and it would have been the regular trade deadline. You probably would not even be on this show. You'd be working hard trying to get a hold of all these deals that are happening. So this trading deadline is interesting. It's now August 31st, and I would not be shocked to see teams be very hesitant this deadline, especially in terms of rentals. So if there's a guy that has a year left on his deal and you're trading 1 month, you're trading for 1 month of him, I don't understand what you would give up. Like, I wouldn't, sure as heck wouldn't be a top 5, top 8 prospect. So what do you think the game plan for some of these contending teams, some of these rebuilding teams would be this deadline?
Yeah, I mean, you have a good point. If Mookie Betts hadn't signed that extension, what would he be worth at this trade? Obviously, the Dodgers aren't trading him, but wouldn't have traded him anyways. But just that as an example, I think going into it, teams are going to be hesitant to trade for that reason. Nobody's going to come to an agreement. Your players teams are going to think, take the Indians, for example. I don't think they'll be selling, but if they were to trade Francisco Lindor, they'd want what he's normally worth. A team buying him would want what you would normally give up for a player for having them for 2 months. So I think just because of that, teams aren't going to reach an agreement, and we're not going to see any star players traded, and probably not that many rentals. It'll probably end up being someone who you can get a year and a half of control, or two and a half years of control for. And at the same time, normally at the trade deadline, 50% of the teams are buying, 50% are selling. But with a shortened season where, there's not as much, at this point, not as many teams have separated themselves from the pack as clear leaders, coupled with the idea that the playoffs are expanded to 16 teams, you're going to have 24 to 25 teams that think they're contending. That means you have 5 sellers, and those 5 sellers are going to be obviously bottom of the standings, really bad teams. And they probably don't have that many star players that they can trade, because obviously when you're a good team, or when you're a bad team like that with a star player who's a rental, you trade them away. But we don't really have that this year. So with that, I just don't see a busy trade deadline, in terms of the short rental period, different players, and just different team statuses. There's going to be trades, but they're going to be, smaller, minor trades, no big name players on the move this year.
Yeah, what a plot twist that would be if we saw the Detroit Tigers buying at the deadline. Like, nobody would have expected that, and that would be hilarious. Anyways, let's get into you a little bit. So, how old were you when you got into sports journalism, and how did you get started?
When did I get into sports journalism? Sports in general, sports journalism, probably 12 or 13. It's hard to put a number on it exactly, but storytelling and journalism in general. I know when I was with a friend when I was like 9, and we started a little newspaper that we shared with our families. We walked down the road. We saw, a car, like a piece of a car in the road. We wrote about that. We went into the woods and we saw, I don't know, stupid as it sounds, we saw birds and we wrote about that. Just that relaying of stories, that started when I was 9. But I'd say, the legitimate sports journalism on my personal blog, and when I was around 12, I started an Instagram for Boston Sports, where I recorded a podcast, and it quickly grew to about 1,200 followers. Started that probably around the same time when I was 11 or 12. So those were the first 2 things that really pointed in that direction of sports journalism. But then Sports Illustrated Kids back in 2000, I think that was 2018 when I started writing for them. So that was the first sign that, okay, people actually like my work. Like, people are noticing me and they actually want what I've written. That's pretty cool. So I guess if you really want to put an exact number on it, 2018 would be the year. But in prior years, as early as 2013, 2014 was when I really got started, being fascinated with journalism. But the sports in general, just being interested in sports, goes way back to when I was like 3. I was watching Red Sox games when I was 3 or 4. I mean, it's been over a decade of loving sports.
Awesome. So, you're 12 years old sitting here watching Red Sox games. Is there like a certain sports writer, sports reporter, sports broadcaster that you looked at and said, that is the guy. I want to be that guy. I look up to that guy. But, maybe someone you read everything they wrote. Who is that guy for you? Or who is that guy or gal for you?
Yeah, for me, it was Chris Cotillo. He was practically 16 or 17 at the time, if I had to imagine. But it was a trade deadline one year. I think I was doing a live stream. I had like one person listening. It was probably my mom or my dad. But I was, his Twitter page was the one I was refreshing because it was the trade deadline day, and there was a bunch of, rumors coming out, and he was retweeting stuff, posting his own stuff. And I was like, who is this guy? He seems to be on top of a lot of stuff. And I Googled him. I'm like, oh, he's 20 years old. He's from Massachusetts. He lives nearby. He's half the age of the Ken Rosenthal's out there. So I thought that was pretty cool because obviously when you're someone young like that, you want to see other younger people in the industry because those are the people you look up to. So, I had my computer screen open to probably tabs with 15 guys, Ken Rosenthal, Jeff Passan, John Heyman, guys like that. But Chris Cotillos was the one I kept checking because, I just felt that, not relation, because I wasn't obviously not at that level, still not at the level of Chris Cotillo, but just that, this is cool. He lives nearby. He's this age. He loves baseball too. He loves the trade deadline as much as I do. I guess that was the first of many inspirations, I guess.
Yeah, and of course, well, for me, of course, everybody's going to point to the Jeff Passons, the Ken Rosenthals, the Bob Knight. The Nightingale he gets an interesting rap, but he's overall a good writer. He's just got an interesting Twitter presence. But for me, like Devin Fink, that guy in a second life, I would want to be him. I mean, he's got it all down, writing for Fangraphs now. So how does a high school kid like you run like 1,400 different sites, write for like 1,200 other different sites? How do you even have time for this? Because I was having trouble figuring out when I'm going to do algebra and figuring out when I'm going to get in the weight room for baseball, get home late at night after these games. And I'm sure you've had these run-ins too with schedules. So how do you have time for this?
Yeah, I mean, just being, like being, really not strict on myself, but whenever there's a period of time, I'm not much of a video games person. So when I have that time, I just go for it. I do my homework, as soon as I can. Study halls at school, I'll be writing when I probably shouldn't be writing, but just finding times like that, because there's, when you not manage a staff of people, but when you have to edit people's work or write your own content, the world's not going to wait for you to do that. So you have to find that time. It's challenging. There have been times where I've missed deadlines, and other people have had deadlines, that they've been waiting on me for, like, to edit their articles, and I've missed those deadlines. But people have been pretty great to this point, and understanding that this is still a pretty small operation, and it's I'm a high school student, so not everything's going to come in on time. But just being as much as I can, as attentive and focused on what's in front of me and what I have to do, setting my mind to it. Once I sit down and start editing something, I edit 10 articles. I don't get up and go get food or anything like that. I just grind and work and stuff like that.
Sorry about that. Yeah, that's my ringtone. It's the NFL on Fox song. It's a good alarm. It hold on. Yeah, it's really scary when it goes off, and I just jumped. So I can't wait to look at that replay.
That got me hyped up for football season.
Yeah.
I miss that sound.
Yeah, it's gonna. I pictured Joe Buck and Troy Aikman in the booth already. So social media has been super important in this new age of journalism, and it's given me opportunities. I'm sure it's given you opportunities. So how important has that been for what you've been able to accomplish?
Oh, 100%. Basically everything that you see in my bio, the different roles that I have, those have all come through social media. My first paid writing job was, NFL Fan Blitz, which turned into Fan Source, which turned into Primetime Sports Talk. But when I first joined NFL Fan Blitz, it was through the Connecting Sports Writers Twitter page, which you're probably familiar with. They have 10,000 followers. They post different job openings in sports media, and they connect different sports media members and content creators with each other. So I first learned about that job from there. I got actually before that was MLB Daily Dish, so that was through social media as well, through Chris Cotillo, because I saw he wrote for MLB Daily Dish. That's what he didn't work for them when I joined them, but that's what made me interested in that site. So really, the power of social media is incredible. And like I said, I probably would have, the Sports Illustrated kids position was not through social media, but everything else that I've joined and began a path with, those are social media 100% all the way.
So do you have a favorite interview or story that you've ever done? I know that's probably hard because you've written a lot.
I hate to go straight to the most famous person I've interviewed, but I interviewed Alex Rodriguez back in 2018 over the phone. But he called me. I was like, whoa, Alex Rodriguez is calling me. I learned about the interview a day before. They're like, my editor for Sports Illustrated Kids said, hey, Alex Rodriguez is, wants to chat for about 20 minutes. And then the next day I was home at my desk. He called me and we talked about, just his life in the broadcasting booth on the field for about 20 minutes. So that was pretty cool. And again, that's just the most famous, person that I've interviewed so far. So that came straight to my head. But just interviews that you get to do in person are so much cooler as well. I've done a couple in Portland, Maine with the Portland Sea Dogs AA baseball team. I did 2 pieces down there up there for Sports Illustrated Kids. So those, I guess those are the ones that stand out. I've spoken with a lot of people, like you mentioned, even if it's just a sentence for the quote. The piece I interviewed you and a couple other high school students for about the coronavirus shutting down sports seasons, that was pretty cool. I don't think I had ever interviewed, teenagers before, so that was fun. It's a little intimidating just reaching out to people the same age as me. I wouldn't text my friends from school saying, hey, I'm going to write a story about you. So that was a little weird. But, I got through that, and I wrote that piece and had a bunch of great conversations with people whose sports seasons were shut down. So that was my most recent, I guess, notable interview. But that was a pretty cool one to write, and just, I guess, straying away from just the idea of interviewing someone and just that whole topic in general. That was probably the one that, my favorite so far.
And I have a funny A-Rod story real quick. So it was Sunday Night Baseball last season at Oracle Park, and the Giants were playing the Phillies, and the game was over. And my brother he works in the Coke slide in left field, and he waits for the kids to come down and everything. And we were waiting for him at the back gate where the parking lot is, where the players park, the media. And, Vasgersian left already, and Mendoza left already. Boog Shambi was walking out to his car. Boog Shambi almost hopped in the car that A-Rod was supposed to go into. And so Shambi there's no other car there for him. So A-Rod walks out, and here's my experience with A-Rod. Some lady actually called him over and was like, Alex, come here, I love you. So, A-Rod walks over and takes a selfie with her.
Were you the lady?
No, I was not the lady. You know what? That would have been so fitting, though. So she takes a selfie with him, and I was like, can I get one? So I take a selfie with him. Funny story. Later that night, he's in San Francisco having dinner with the ESPN crew. His car gets broken into. You might have heard this story. And they steal thousands of dollars worth of stuff. And I get framed for this. Everybody on Twitter, all my peeps on Twitter, they're like, oh, Steven had something to do with it. And I'm not going to deny it, because it's a pretty awesome thing to be connected to. But, and the news covered it. The news showed that picture. The local news showed that picture. And that was, my run-in with A-Rod is definitely more embarrassing than yours. That's for sure.
Yeah, mine went pretty smooth. It was all over the phone, so I wasn't framed for anything like that. Thank goodness.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. So real quick, before we head off, I promised that I'd get into umpiring with you. Do you have a strike three call?
I don't. I wish I did. I've been, I was a little intimidated the first person I rung up. It was just a simple strike three. I've gotten a little more of a booming voice now that I've become more comfortable. We, due to the coronavirus, we've been behind the mound umpiring. We recently switched to behind the plate in just one town that I do several towns. So in one of the towns we're behind the plate, that actually made me a little more comfortable. Just feeling like that presence of being behind home plate made me feel, I guess, more like an umpire. So I was a little more comfortable then doing a big strike three call, but I don't have any motion or anything. I'm still just strike three.
Yeah.
Pretty simple.
So when you first eject someone, you're going to need to come back on this show and explain it, because that is going to be a top-notch story.
Yeah, absolutely. I've last night, actually, I once had to eject someone, but it ended before it came to that. But it was a player. And if a coach yells at me and argues with me, I'm fine with it. But when I start to hear players yipping at me, like, oh, please don't do this, I don't want to eject you, because it's gonna, everything that comes after the ejection, coaches getting mad, players getting mad. I don't even know if there's like a process of telling the league or something like that. Like, I hope to never have to eject someone, because it's pretty rare that someone at the 10-year-old level will get ejected. But if that happens, I will definitely come back and let you know about it.
Yeah, for sure. And you hope you don't have to eject anybody. I hope you do.
You never like it. I heard last week when I was umpiring, or 2 weeks ago, from behind the mound, a player in the first base dugout said, "Oh, when are they going to get robo umps?" I'm like, whoa, calm down.
That's definitely an insult that you didn't think you wanted to hear at the 10-year-old level. That's for sure. Now I want to umpire. You've inspired me to become an umpire of my own, so that should be interesting. Andersen, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. Again, you guys could find him on Twitter at Andersen Pickard. You guys could find him on Primetime Sports Talk, where he's the editor-in-chief. And you guys could find him, of course, on MLB Daily Dish. And he's also the manager of Sports Writing Pack, which is a site that connects members of the sports content community. So, Andersen, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Love talking sports. I've expanded. I've done a lot of Zoom interviews and stuff like this over the summer. I really haven't been on any podcasts or shows before that, so it's really been great this summer, helping on a bunch of different shows and talking sports. I would definitely love to come back if the opportunity presents itself.
Awesome. You guys can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at RizzoCast. Thank you for listening. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. This is also distributed anywhere you listen to your podcasts. So go ahead and subscribe and do all that fun stuff. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching, and have a great day.